So, what if I told you that everything around you, yeah, the chair you're sitting on, the screen you're staring at right now, what if I said it only exists because you are perceiving it? I know, it sounds totally absurd, but it's actually one of the most stubborn and fascinating ideas in all of philosophy, and it comes from an 18th century Irish bishop named George Berkeley. His main idea seems impossible, but you gotta stick with me here, because the way he argues for it is shockingly difficult to tear down.
All right, let's just start with that classic question, right? You've probably heard it before. Does a tree falling in a forest make a sound if no one is there? Let's take it a step further. Does the tree even exist when no one is there to see it? Does your room stay put after you shut the door and walk away? I mean, our common sense just screams, of course it does. But Berkeley, he's about to take a sledgehammer to that very idea.
So Berkeley's answer is super simple and at the same time completely and utterly radical. He put it in Latin to make it sound official, esse est percipi. All that means is to be perceived. His whole argument was that for anything, a tree, a rock, a mountain, you name it, for it to exist, it has to be perceived by a mind. If there's no mind around to see it, hear it, or feel it, it's just not there. I know, it sounds nuts, but let's actually follow his logic and see where it goes.
Now, to build his case, Berkeley doesn't start by talking about minds. He does something way cleverer. He starts by trying to completely demolish the one concept we all take for granted, physical matter. His goal is to show that this stuff we think the world is made of is actually just a big philosophical mistake.
See, Berkeley wasn't just making this up in a vacuum. He was in a direct debate with other huge thinkers of his time, especially John Locke. And Locke himself kind of walked right into this. He admitted that if you try to imagine matter all by itself, you strip away its color, its shape, its texture, all the things you can sense, you're left with, well, a complete mystery. Locke literally called it something I know not what. And for Berkeley, that little admission was the crack in the whole foundation.
So he uses a philosophical position called nominalism to really press his attack. And the argument is deceptively simple. It says we don't really have these purely abstract ideas. I mean, go ahead, try it. Try to imagine matter in general. You can't, can you? You can only picture something specific, something that's red or hard or round. So Berkeley says a word like matter, when you strip away all those qualities we can perceive, is just a meaningless sound. It doesn't point to anything real.
Okay, so here's how the logic flows. Everything we experience, literally everything, comes to us as qualities we can sense. You see the color red, you feel a rough texture, you see a round shape, and we learn to call a certain bundle of these qualities an apple. But think about it. We never actually perceive the mysterious, invisible matter that's supposedly holding all those qualities together. So Berkeley's radical conclusion is this. If we have zero evidence for this mysterious substance, why should we believe in it? The only things we can actually be sure of are minds and the ideas that those minds perceive.
Okay, I know exactly what you're thinking right now. If reality is just a bunch of ideas, then why isn't it just a chaotic mess? Why can't I just imagine $1 million on my table and make it real? Why does fire always feel hot? If it's all in the mind, why is reality so stubbornly consistent and predictable for every single one of us? This is the biggest, most obvious objection, and this is where Berkeley's argument gets really, really interesting. Berkeley's answer comes down to a really important distinction he makes between two types of ideas. First, you've got active ideas. These are the ones you're in control of. You can right now imagine a giraffe with butterfly wings. You just created that idea. It's voluntary. But then there are passive ideas. These are the sensations that just happen to you. You don't choose to feel the heat from a fire. It's an involuntary thing that impresses itself on you. You can't just wish that pain away.
And this leads us right to the central puzzle of his whole system. We know we are the source of our daydreams and imaginary ideas. But what's the source of the real, shared world we all seem to experience? If it's not some unthinking, invisible matter out there, and it's clearly not our own minds making it up, then where in the world does it all come from?
This very puzzle builds up to Berkeley's grand finale, and honestly, for a lot of people, his most controversial conclusion. To solve this problem of where reality comes from, he introduces the idea of an ultimate, all-encompassing, universal mind.
Yep, Berkeley's solution is God. He argues that there has to be a supreme, infinite mind that is the cause of this orderly, predictable world of passive ideas that we all experience. So reality isn't just in your mind. You can think of it as a kind of divine broadcast. God is constantly speaking or streaming this sensory world to all of our individual finite minds. And that's why we all perceive the same consistent reality. We're all tuned in to the same channel. This all problem was captured perfectly in a famous little limerick. It gets right to the heart of the common sense objection we all have.
What about that tree in the forest, or, a tree on a university quad when absolutely nobody is there to see it? According to Berkeley's own logic, shouldn't it just, poof, blink out of existence?
And here's the brilliant reply, which perfectly nails Berkeley's solution. The world doesn't flicker in and out of existence because there is one mind that is always perceiving everything all the time. The tree continues to exist because it exists as an idea in the constant, unending consciousness of God.
All right, so even with God as the ultimate guarantor of reality, you're probably still thinking of some pretty big problems with this whole idea. And you know what? You're right to be skeptical. So let's really put this theory to the test and see how Berkeley tries to handle some of the toughest objections out there.
This one is maybe the biggest moral challenge. If all our passive sensations, like the pain from a burn or a terrible disease, are being caused directly by God, doesn't that make God the author of all evil and suffering? I mean, you can't just blame a hurricane on mindless physical processes anymore. In this system, you have to say that God is directly causing that suffering. That's a huge problem. Berkeley's answer is what philosophers call the greater good defense. First, he says that for us to be able to live our lives, plan for the future, and even do science, the world has to operate according to consistent, predictable laws, what we call the laws of nature. And while these laws are good for us overall, they can sometimes lead to what he calls particular inconveniences, like natural disasters. Second, he saw pain and pleasure as a kind of teacher or pedagogue, sent from God to guide our actions and help us survive. But, and this is a big but, he draws a hard line. God is not responsible for moral evil. Sin, he argues, comes from the choices we make using our own free will. That stuff comes from our active ideas.
And here's another really deep one. If everything I see, hear, and touch, including other people, is just a collection of passive ideas being sent to my mind by God, how do I know that you are a real conscious being just like me? How do I know I'm not the only real mind in a world full of incredibly realistic puppets? This is the classic, terrifying problem of solipsism.
Berkeley's answer here is the argument from analogy. Basically, it goes like this. I know from my own direct experience that my mind is connected to my body's actions. So when I see your body acting in similarly complex and intelligent ways, when you speak or laugh or argue with me, I infer, by analogy, that your body must also be connected to a mind, just like mine is. Now, it's not direct proof, but he says it's a very reasonable inference to make.
So, why does any of this 300-year-old philosophy actually matter today? Well, because Berkeley's seemingly bizarre idea turned out to be incredibly ahead of its time. It posed a challenge that would echo all the way down the centuries to the frontiers of modern physics.
To really get Berkeley's modern relevance, just look at the history of physics. Back in his day, the Newtonian view was king. Matter was just tiny, solid, indivisible little billiard balls. Berkeley was the radical who stood up and asked, okay, but where's the evidence for this inert stuff? Now fast forward a few hundred years, and physics starts to sound a whole lot more like Berkeley. With Einstein's E equals mc squared, matter isn't seen as solid stuff anymore, it's understood as a form of energy. And it gets even weirder in quantum mechanics, where the very act of observing something seems to affect its state. The universe at its most fundamental level doesn't behave like a collection of tiny marbles at all. It behaves a lot more like a system of information that responds to perception.
So the ultimate point here isn't whether Berkeley was definitively right about everything. It's that his radical commitment to empiricism, this idea that our beliefs have to be based on actual evidence, was truly revolutionary. He took that principle so seriously that he was willing to throw out the entire concept of physical matter, forcing everyone after him to ask, what do we really know about the world? And how do we know it?
And that leaves us with a profound and very modern question to think about. We tend to assume that reality is just this external thing out there that we explore and discover, but Berkeley's philosophy suggests a totally different possibility, that reality is something that is actively being communicated to us. So is the world a physical place, or is it a message? Are we explorers in a vast material universe, or are we participants in a grand reality that literally requires a mind to even exist? That's the challenge Berkeley leaves for us.